We ready? Good afternoon, everyone. We will be holding our Transportation and Environment Subcommittee of Appropriations meeting today, covering the agencies of Maryland Department of Transportation Overview, MDOT Debt Service, Maryland Insurance Administration, and Department of Planning. We will take the Department of Planning first, then the Maryland Insurance Administration, and then we will finish with MDOT. So we will have Elizabeth Weibel, who is the legislative analyst, give us a brief overview of the Department of Planning's budget, and we will then have Ms. Flora come forward when she's ready after. Yes, you can come forward now, but you may go ahead, Ms. Weibel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start on page 1 of the analysis. You'll see that the fiscal 2026 allowance is $52.7 million, which is a $3.3 million decrease from the prior year, and about 80% of this is in general funds. The bottom of page 2 has some information about a proposed deficiency. This is $1.8 million in federal funds from the U.S. Department of Transportation to support a pilot program using drones to deliver healthcare resources between Crisfield and Smith Island on the Eastern Shore. Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows an overview of the fiscal 2026 budget as proposed. You'll see 42% of the allowance is for the Maryland Historic Revitalization Tax Credit, which is operated by the Maryland Historic Trust. And this is $22 million in mandated funding for a reserve fund to support tax credits for rehabilitation projects at commercial historic properties. And then the rest of the pie chart is divided into administrative and programmatic units. 15% of the the budget is for management planning and educational outreach. This includes administration of the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. 13% is for the operations division. 8% is for museum service. This includes operation of the Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum and the Maryland Archaeology Conservation Laboratory. Page 6 shows the change in the proposed budget. Most of the decrease is due to one-time federal funding in fiscal 2025 for the drone pilot program that I mentioned earlier, and $1.5 million for the Maryland 250 Commission. Fiscal 2025 also had one-time pass-through grants for the SHINE program at Maryland Humanities and for the Maryland Center for History and Culture. On page 7, you'll see there is a BRFA provision regarding the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. This program receives up to $6 million of program open space funding annually, and most of that is for grants, although up to 10% can be spent on operating costs. And the BRFA provision would allow an additional $340,000 to be used for operating costs in fiscal 2026 for a grant software procurement, and this would reduce the amount available for grants. Page 8 has personnel information. The fiscal 2026 allowance adds 7 regular positions due to contractual conversions, and DLS has asked MDP to comment on its plan for the contractual conversions. Moving on to key observations on page 9, there's an update on the Maryland 250 Commission, which was established to facilitate statewide observance of the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. In fiscal 2024, the Commission launched 3 small grant programs in partnership with Maryland Humanities for nonprofits and local government entities. And through October 2024, Maryland 250 Commission has received about $800,000 in state funding and a $10,000 grant from America 250, and has spent about $365,000. In December, the Commission received an additional $1.5 million in federal funding to support the grant programs. The fiscal 2026 allowance includes $250,000 in general funds for the Commission, and DLS has asked the department to provide an update on what funding the Commission has available and whether the full $250,000 in the allowance will be needed for fiscal 2026. Key observation 2 has to do with the Historic Revitalization Tax Credit Program. This receives $22 million in general funds, and this goes into a reserve fund to reimburse the general fund once tax credits are claimed. This is actually for 2 programs. The Competitive Commercial Program receives $20 million, and the Small Commercial Program receives $2 million. There's also a homeowner credit that people can claim directly on their taxes, which isn't funded by this reserve fund. Prior to fiscal 2023, funding for these programs was discretionary, And the program received $7 million in fiscal '22 and $3.5 million in fiscal 2021. In fiscal 2024, the program approved $20.4 million in anticipated credits for 10 competitive commercial products, with a total estimated rehabilitation cost of $93 million. In light of the current fiscal situation, DLS recommends reducing funding in fiscal 2026 for the competitive commercial program by $2 million to a total of $18 million. And that recommendation is on page 11. That concludes my presentation, and I can take any questions.
Thank you. We will move forward with Madam Secretary's testimony, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon. Chair Watson and everyone with the committee, appreciate your time here today. I am, for the record, Rebecca Flores, Secretary, Maryland Department of Planning, and I have with me to my right is Director Elizabeth Hughes with the Maryland Historic Trust, and to my immediate left is Jeff Can, who is our Assistant Secretary of Operations, and then our left is Rod Cofield, who is our Director of the Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum, who will all join me in the testimony today. We're going to zero in on the 3 key areas that were identified in the DLS report, starting with personnel data as it relates to the contractual conversions. Those conversions are all related to the Maryland Historic Trust and our Jefferson Patterson Park, and because they are primarily funded with special funds, there's a bit of an apples and oranges in that they come from different types of funding sources, and so a direct conversion is not really applicable, but the additional funds are providing us with the ability to make those conversions, and they will be phased in over time, which is what we're planning for, and Director Hughes is here to answer any questions specific to that. I think what I'll propose is to just touch on each of the 3 areas and then be available for questions. The next area is the Maryland 250 Commission. We're extremely proud and excited about how far we've come in the last 2 years with that, both in the reissuance of the executive order, the first year in 2023 with this administration and Governor Moore, and basically through the creation of a full commission that is chaired by former Governor Glenn Denning, and vice chair is the Honorable Katie O'Malley, and the whole commission has been very engaged in their overall programming and strategy and for the commission and the activities. And then, of course, we have our director, Michelle Johnson, who has been logging miles back and forth across the state to make this a real grassroots opportunity for everyone across the state. So in terms of allocations there, we have been very much focusing on how to approach this overall initiative. So it's not just a one big bang approach. That's always been the objective, is to make it something that will have lasting impact for Maryland over time. And so some of the funds that have been carried over are already being focused on something I'm particularly really excited about in terms of new ways of thinking about history and service and how we are approaching this overall opportunity of how Maryland celebrates. One is the branded video game, which, helps us get to a whole other, I think, constituent group in terms of how we think about these aspects of Maryland. And then another one where we're in discussions with professional minor league baseball teams. I will point out also, just for benchmarking purposes, is that as we look at our neighboring states, Delaware so far has invested about $1 million in their overall 250 program. Virginia at $22 million, interestingly, New Jersey at $25 million, and Pennsylvania at about $9.6 million. These are merely for benchmarking purposes only. We're trying to take the funds that we do have and use them to seed a lot of opportunities and actually leverage existing events that may already be happening, but really getting out in front of that to provide specialized grant fundings in small amounts to communities so everybody can join in with everything that will be happening throughout the year in 2026 and throughout the state. And so our recommendation is this would not be the time, considering that the big year is nearly upon us, just a year away in 2026, where we'll be needing to make commitments really very heavily now that we have everything fully stood up and operating, looking towards that whole year of 2026. And then also a reminder, this program will shut down. 2027 per the executive order, will end in 2027, and we are working diligently to ensure everything that will have been captured in terms of stories, websites, activities are all being, essentially will be archived for future use in Maryland, whether it be for the 400th or other types of activities throughout the state. And we're actually including that with a lot of the work at Maryland Historic Trust. So that's sort of my high-level overview of that. Regarding the historic revitalization tax credit, this tax credit is really one of the heavily used programs in the state. We always have way more demand than we have available funds for that. And in fact, last year had $38 million requested of the money that was available. The other thing I'll point out on that is that for every $2 million in tax credit, of course, that leverages $8 million in private investments. So it is not our recommendation, although we certainly respect the budget times that we were in, but we really feel that that money has such high use and high leverage potential that it would be good to continue the program operating as it is. However, we know we all have to make hard decisions, and priorities do have to be considered, in which case, if that is the direction that you all choose to move in, we would suggest that that be targeted towards the small commercial rather than the competitive commercial component of the program, which has been less used for a variety of reasons, and I'll let Director Hughes go into that if you'd like to know more about that, but that would be our recommendation there. And so that's my overview, and then I will utilize our team to respond to any questions you may have for us. Thank you.
Thank you. We will have some question and answer before we get to the public testimony now. And members who would like to ask the first question? Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been almost 30 years since I was a college intern at the Maryland Department of Planning. It's nice to be back with you all today, not that any of you were necessarily there when I was there. My first question is about the recommendation from the department, if we were to make a cut to the tax credit program, to look at the small commercial credit program. It's my understanding that money allocated each year rolls over and accumulates. So does anyone know what the total balance of the small commercial credit fund is right now?
We do, and I'm going to let Director Hughes go ahead and respond directly, who's closest to it, but we do have that number, and it's another reason why we're suggesting to go in that direction if we must go somewhere.
Sure. Right now we have about 2.3 in total unassigned credits. So from fiscal year 24, around 500,000 that rolled over, and where we are right now is 1.8 million that hasn't been spent out of this fiscal year.
And that's just for this fiscal year?
Correct.
Okay. And one more question, if I may, on a different topic. On the Maryland 250 Commission, thanks for your work on that. I've seen your representatives out and about around the state on this important effort. You did receive $1.5 million in ARPA funding in December of 2024, and I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you envision that funding being deployed and whether any of it may potentially offset some of the general fund a budget amount of $250,000 that we're looking at.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. We were actually quite much welcomed that opportunity to be able to supplement our overall funds. Those are being used primarily for small grants. We had to essentially be able to encumber those funds before the end of the calendar year. And so there are plans for all of those funds. They had to be encumbered as part of the ability to receive those funds. The specifics and the details of every aspect of it, once again, I'll turn to Director Hughes, who's overseeing that, but they have been encumbered as per the receipt of the funds. Would you like some detail on specifics?
That'd be great if you have it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with that money, which we're very happy to receive, is that it really can't be used for operating expenses. So we're really looking at getting that money out for various projects. One is the regional festival idea so that it can really be spread around, working with local partners around the state in the 2026 year. And then the other portion is getting that money out in the existing grant programs that we have. And there's also some discussion of using a portion of the money to really assist local 250 commissions that have been created. We know of at least around 15 so far. That hasn't been presented to the full commission yet as a proposal, but it's one of the potential uses. So generally, getting the money out to support festivals, regional festivals, as well as the existing grant programs and perhaps creating a new one as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to try to fill in for our good colleague who unfortunately is out sick, but I am not as good looking, nor do I have as neat an accent as Delegate Edelson. But Madam Secretary, it's good to see you again, and thank you for being here with your team. I had two questions for you, not sort of directly related to the budget, but a topic that we've talked about before. And I think given where we are potentially with the calamities at the federal level in getting funding out the door, this is almost even more important. I think you and I had talked last year with your team about creating sort of a Maryland version of grants.gov. At the federal level, we've got currently, well, actually, I don't know, maybe it's been pulled down at this point, but a really robust website that gives, the full information for notices of opportunity of funding and very robust details when you have to apply for any sort of a grant. And we've never really had that at Maryland. And I've heard from constituents and groups that we work with that they just don't even know funding opportunities. We've had a couple in particular where, oh, we meet with the team, you would have been perfect for this, but the grant closed 2 months ago, but we couldn't even find it. So I'm wondering if you could give me an update on where your team is potentially on creating a Maryland grants.gov that are, that organizations across the state could take advantage of to be able to access the really great programs that we have.
Delegate, I presume you're referring to grants like through all agencies versus
Correct. Sort of like one clearinghouse.
One clearinghouse. I believe actually at the governor's office, they're working on that particular type of approach, but I would have to double check on that and get back to you.
Okay.
I know in terms of our programs in particular, we do a heavy push out through social media and a variety of avenues, but I'd have to get back to you on the statewide, unless there's anyone else on my team that has an answer. I'd have to get back to you.
Okay. I will follow up on you on that. For some reason, thought somebody had said to me that planning, and we had, so I'll follow up with you on that.
Yeah, let's.
And then the other question, again, not immediate, but I think has really deep ramifications potentially for our state. Obviously, planning runs the state's outreach on the census program, and there's concerning information coming out about, once again, the administration trying to fairly radically change the way the census is done, which could have just really terrible ramifications for funding that the state receives. Are you all starting to track that? And, obviously we've got a ways to go until 2030, but it's the prep for 2030 will be here sooner than we know it. So just curious if you could maybe give us an update on that.
The short answer is yes. We, as the agency that basically does contract with the U.S. Census, we have already started gearing up for the next census in 2030. In fact, we've included in the fiscal year 26 budget ability to start that process, and have already been in touch with the U.S. Census. We don't know what's ahead, but I think in light of the last one occurring during COVID, taking all the lessons learned we did from the last time around to ensure, the biggest thing is to ensure we reach the hardest to reach populations and that we account for everybody. While we were one of the top 10 in the country in terms of our level of reporting, there's still people that we need to make sure we count for, which is why we've requested actually as early as the fiscal year 26 budget to start ramping up already. And fortunately, a lot of the team that was there at that time, this last round, are still with us. And so all of those lessons learned can be carried forward.
Great. I think the sooner you can loop us in and anything we can do to help, I know that was a big component of the 2020 outreach as well. So I know I'll be happy to disseminate and start working on that with you.
Absolutely appreciate that.
Thank you, Delegate Solomon. Seeing no other questions, we will move on to the public hearing portion of the meeting. Right now, we have 9 people signed up to testify. The first one, Lucille Walker from the Southern Maryland Heritage Area, followed by Bridget Carty from the Lower Susquehanna Heritage Greenway, followed by Chris Snesnick, Star Spangled Banner Flag House Association. And you each have up to 2 minutes, but don't feel you have to use all the time. Thank you, and you may begin.
Hi, I'm Lucille Walker. I am the Executive Director of the Southern Maryland National Heritage Area. We are both a state and national heritage area. And I am also a co-chair of the Maryland Heritage Area Coalition. I'm joined by our co-chair, Bridget, and several members of our coalition are here. If you could stand up and say where you're from, who you are, that would be great.
I'm Liz Chateau. I'm the Director of the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area, and we include Carroll, Frederick, and Washington. Gail Owens. I'm the director of the Stories of the Chesapeake Heritage Area, and we include Talbot, Kent, Queen Anne's, and Caroline counties.
I'm Megan Bacco. I'm the executive director of Anacostia Trails Heritage Area and Prince George's Capital.
And Bridget Carty, Lower Susquehanna Heritage Greenway, representing Hartford and Cecil counties.
We're a statewide program, right? So there are 13 heritage areas in Maryland. Maryland is really unique in that way because there are only another state other than us, Pennsylvania, that have a state-based heritage area. And it really shows how Maryland values its heritage. And we are here to basically say thank you to the administration for recognizing that and for the full funding in this current cycle, because currently we are unable to fund twice as many grants as we get applications for, and I'm talking excellent grants. I'm talking locally based, community, economic growth grants. We are part of the solution for Maryland's growth. We are a fast-moving granting organizations. We are operationally low, program high. So we're very pleased that that's been recognized. We also do have a concern about the BRFA that was mentioned, the $340,000. That goes from our granting ability. That is 3 capital grants and 1 major program grant that we will not be able to fund. And that's what we have right now is the inability to fund a number of excellent grants. And since that's going to operations, that takes it out of the economics. So we just wanted to mention that. So we thank you all again. One example I often say from my area, when people say, what's a heritage area? I say history is what has already happened. We're not the history area. It's foundational to who we are. It's what we build on. It's everything we have going forward. But heritage, but by definition, history has already happened. Heritage is that bridge. Say we have a barn, we have beautiful barns in our region. I'd love to save those barns, but its economic sustainability is the model. And so in order to save that barn, there has to be a program associated with it which will sustain it going forward. So that's just a quick example. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. We are moving on to Bridget.
I was just going
Carrie?
to concur and support as coalition co-chairs. We're representing together and here to answer any questions that you might have.
I appreciate that.
Oh, and want to do the $7 to 1? I forgot to
Yes,
mention.
yes. Okay, yeah, so heritage areas not only foster community engagement, but are also a powerful economic driver, as Lucille mentioned. For every dollar Maryland invests, the return is 7. That translates to $2.4 billion injected into Maryland's economy each year and the support of 40,000 jobs statewide.
And we have that report if you all would like it.
We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carey. Mr. Snezek?
Yes, hello. Good morning to all the committee members present. My name is Christopher Snezek.
Snezek, thank you.
Sneeze and a hiccup. It's great. And I am the executive director of the Star Spangled Banner Flag House Association located in Baltimore City, 46th District. It is with great pleasure that I was asked to provide oral testimony in support of Maryland Humanities fiscal year 2026 request for the Maryland State's investment in their SHINE grant-making initiative. The Star Spangled Banner Flag House Association and Museum, which for all of our sake, I'm going to just shorten to Flag House, is a National Historic Landmark and house museum with the primary focus of interpreting the life and legacy of Mary Young Pickersgill, a 19th century female entrepreneur, businesswoman, and craftswoman. She is most famous for crafting the Star Spangled Banner flag, which flew over Fort McHenry and inspired our country's national anthem. This year, my organization received $10,000 from the SHINE grant funding. With this funding, we are planning to expand our program offerings and increase educational opportunities for school groups and families. We have also seen an uptick in visitation after a lull due to COVID restrictions, and have found there is renewed community interest in supporting family programming. Additionally, this funding has been pivotal in continuing our research on the Pickersgill Young family and interpreting their lives as early Baltimore citizens. Prior to my role as the Flag House Director, I was the development coordinator for the Jewish Museum of Maryland, so I was constantly scouring for grants. Unfortunately, my organization, like many others, understands that the scarcity of general operating support grants, and we benefit greatly from being a SHINE grant recipient. Grants for general operating support, like SHINE, have always been very difficult to find, but over the last several years, I've noticed that that many granting organizations have been shifting towards programmatic support. This shift is understandable and fine for organizations with large staffing capacity to take on multiple large projects. But when a small museum, like the Flag House, with only one full-time and one part-time staff member, who on top of daily operations now need to support programmatic advancement, I highly recommend that you support grant fundraising and the Maryland Shine Grant.
Thank you, and we appreciate your testimony and the work that you're doing in Baltimore City. We have Lindsay Baker. For our people who are here to testify today. Ms. Baker.
Hi, good afternoon, thank you. Chair Watson, I'm Lindsay Baker, the CEO for Maryland Humanities, and I am joined here by my Director of Advancement, Claudia Allen, my Director of Programs, Alexandra Sonatas, and my Program Officer Grants, Emily Ross. We're here today for a really simple request. We would love to see money for Shine put back into the budget. The last 2-3 years that we've had it, from FY23 to FY25, we've had the opportunity to re-grant $2.35 million around the state. We have reached every single county and Baltimore City with that funding, and the re-grants go to small nonprofits in your communities, and they are $10,000 in general operating support. So that equals what? Jobs, rent, the basic needs that most grants don't fund, and to organizations who have difficulty writing grants to larger nonprofits, to larger foundations, and to the state. So we're really working to fill a gap in your communities. This year we had 93 unfunded applicants. We funded 90. So we are hoping that with $1 million in the FY26 budget that we can continue this important program that puts the dollars back in the tiny organizations in your communities. And I'm going to keep it brief. Thank you.
We appreciate your testimony. Thank you. And we have Robert. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. I'm with the Friends of the President Street Station. We were a recipient of the 2024 Shine Grant. We were incorporated in 1987 as a 501c3 for the preservation of the President Street Station and for educational purposes. Friends of President Street Station is an all-volunteer staff receiving no endowment funding. We work with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, History Department, and we give graduate students work experience opportunities, and also they receive credit hours from UMBC. We do that annually, usually every spring. As most people know, we have administrative overhead with insurance, utilities, and other administrative expense overhead. So the Shine Grant has been an important funding source for this volunteer organization to keep the building open. We are on the doorstep of Harbor East. We are probably the best located institution in the city, being we're right next to 3 major hotels, Marriott Waterfront, Hilton Garden Inn, and the 4-star Four Seasons Hotel. We're a half a block off of the Harbor Place footbridges, so we're a high foot traffic area. The museum sort of functions with our brochure case that's stocked by TDS, Tosh Brochures, who does the hotel brochures. We sort of function as an unofficial welcome center for the state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore. We receive not only local visitors, but national and international visitors annually. So we know we're an asset to the city and the state of Maryland. Actually, we have attended several years to the Maryland Welcome Center retreats because we actually function as an unofficial welcome center. We know the outreach we have to visitors to Baltimore, and with tourism, as you know, it's economic development is one and the same. So again, we're an all-volunteer organization, and the Shine Grant is very supportive of us meeting our administrative goals and programs that we do every year.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate the work you do. and your testimony. We were able to get the $1 million for the Shine Grant in last year. This year, it's a little bit tougher, and so we'll do our best, but we definitely appreciate you being here to advocate for the humanities. So thank you.
Thank you.
Members, I believe that is everyone who has signed up to testify. Oh, yes, of course. Go ahead, Delegate Mangiani.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a quick question so I have a better understanding to the young lady. You said you fill about, or fully funded about 90 some, which is great. What's the average grant that you fully fund to some of these different organizations?
Thank you, first of all, for calling me young lady. Second of all, I will say that's a very easy answer to give. Every grant is $10,000 of general operating support, and every organization, in order to be eligible, has to have a budget of $500,000 or less. So it's definitely the small micro organizations where $10,000 goes a little bit further than a larger one. Good, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That is Department of Planning may exit, and we'll have the Maryland Insurance Administration come forward. And right, we have Secretary Marie Grant may come forward, and we have Scott Benson here, who's going to begin the legislative analysis summary for us. You may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Today, I'll be discussing the analysis for the Maryland Insurance Administration. The Maryland Insurance Administration, or MIA, is responsible for licensing and regulating insurers, insurance agents, and brokers who conduct business within the state, as well as for monitoring the financial solvency of licensed insurers. As you can see in the operating budget summary, the fiscal 2026 budget increases by $1.1 million, or 1.9%, to $57.9 million. On page 2 in Exhibit 1, you can see the overview of agency spending. The largest portion of the allowance for fiscal 2026 is dedicated to regular personnel at $36 million, or 62% of the overall allowance. On page 3 in Exhibit 2, you can see the proposed budget. The greatest increases in the proposed budget for fiscal 2026 are associated with personnel, as well as the implementation of the insurance tracking system, which is decreasing by about $1.5 million. On page 5 in Exhibit 3, you can see the new positions by unit. Now, the fiscal 2026 allowance includes 13 new regular positions and a net decrease of 7 contractual full-time equivalent positions. The unit receiving the most new positions is the Insurance Fraud Division. On page 6 in Exhibit 4, you can see the total vacancies per month between January 2023 and December 2024. The increase in vacancies in July 2024 is simply due to the fiscal 2025 allowance going into force. On page 7 in Exhibit 5, you can see the December vacancies and the fiscal 2025 year-to-date hiring by unit, with the December 2024 vacancies in blue, the occupied positions in December 2024 in red, and the green dots represent net hires between July 2024 to December 2024. The first observation to discuss involves the insurance tracking system, the Major Information Technology Development Project. Now, MIA originally identified the need to replace its current system and begin planning for a new system in the summer of 2019, as the current legacy system was custom built for the agency in the 1990s. Originally, the insurance tracking system project was estimated to cost between $2 and $3 million for the total project development and implementation. But as you can see in Exhibit 6 on page 9, the funds spent or budgeted between fiscal 2021 and fiscal 2026 for the project, at least according to the highlights volume of the governor's fiscal 2026 budget books. And the fiscal 2026 allowance is $7.7 million, bringing the project bringing the total project cost to about $18.1 million. The second observation to address is the property and casualty complaints. As you can see on page 10 in Exhibit 7, which shows the property and casualty complaints received and percentage resolved within 90 days. Since fiscal 2021, there's been an increase in P&C complaints received, matching similar levels to fiscal 2017. But the percentage of P&C complaints resolved within 90 days has continually decreased since fiscal 2022, but it's estimated to increase in fiscal 2025 and 2026. On page 11, you can see the third observation, which is regarding the fraud division. In Exhibit 8, you can see the fraud cases opened and closed within 180 days between fiscal 2016 and fiscal 2024. As you can see, the referrals open for investigation have decreased significantly since then, and the percentage of referrals open for investigation and closed within 180 days has also decreased. In Exhibit 9, you can see the fraud cases investigated and referred for prosecution and charged. The percentage of open referrals investigated and referred for criminal prosecution have also decreased since fiscal 2016 to 2024. And that brings us to the recommended action. And DLS recommends that the following narrative be adopted: insurance tracking system project status. And that concludes my presentation. I am happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. And we'll go with Secretary Grant now, please.
Thank you so much, Chair Watson, subcommittee members. Marie Grant, Acting Insurance Commissioner at the Maryland Insurance Administration. Pending Senate confirmation, I actually have a hearing later today. So
good luck.
I'm joined today at the table by Joy Hatchett, who's our Deputy Commissioner. Joy's been with the MIA for over 30 years and has deep expertise in all things complaint and consumer outreach and all of the lines that we regulate, and can be a resource if any questions come up. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony for you all regarding our budget for fiscal year 2026. I want to thank the Department of Legislative Services and Mr. Benson for his thoughtful analysis. We agree with his recommendations, and we've also submitted some minor factual corrections, which you'll find in our formal testimony and additional context in our formal response. But I just want to talk through a few of the issues that Mr. Benson raised in our perspective and how we're moving forward. So first of all, as Mr. Benson discussed, we're in the midst of a very exciting, very significant update to our IT systems, replacing our agency's outdated legacy system, which dates back to the 1990s. And of course, as some of you all have seen the history, it's been a project that's had some fits and starts, but I'm happy to be here before you to say it is well underway. We're in the midst of implementation for many of our units in fiscal year 2025, and look forward to completing that work in fiscal year 2026. Some of the corrections in our formal testimony do relate to the budget for this project. I think there was some information missing from the budget highlights that didn't reflect our approved budget amendments for fiscal year 2025. So I do want to say we estimate the overall cost of the project to be a little over $22 million right now. We're estimating that there will be about $7.67 million spent in FY 2026. That is completely out of special funds. And I could not guarantee you that it will be on the penny, just because of the nature of managing a major IT implementation. But I do commit to you all that I am extremely dedicated to getting this project on time and on budget, and we look forward to keeping you updated with regular reports as DLS has recommended. The next area I want to talk about is our property and casualty complaints. We do have a significant backlog of complaints in this area. I think the backlog is at about 3,000 complaints right now, which is frankly unacceptable, but we are working through it. It stems from building complaints between 2021 and 2023. So as folks got back on the road after COVID, a number of costs increased, particularly in that private passenger auto space. We've also seen a lot of increasing rates in homeowners insurance. But it's really that private passenger auto increases that's driven quite a bit of the increase in our complaints. So we have a situation where we're closing complaints now at the same rate that they're coming in. They're at an elevated rate from 2021. We're about on pace, but we need to address that backlog. And there's two ways that we can do that. The first way is to increase the efficiency, make sure that like all our processes are operating as efficiently as they can to address the backlog. We've taken a number of steps to do that. We've rearranged workflows so that our complaint investigators are just focused on investigating complaints. The other way to address it, of course, is additional manpower. And so we've brought in contractual employees, we've brought in retirees from the MIA to help even just part-time to work through some of these complaints, who are expert in these areas. And there is some additional funding in the fiscal year 2026 budget for contractual help so that we can move through this backlog and address it. So the other thing that I just want to tell you all is that we're also focused on preventing complaints to the extent that we can in the first place. And that means a harder look in our rates and forms filings. In property and casualty, rates are file and use in Maryland. We're pretty limited into what we can look at, but we do have authority to ask some harder questions of our insurers, and we're going to be doing that going forward. The last area, or second to last, I should say, I wanted to talk about is fraud investigations. That was highlighted in the DLS analysis. We have a relatively new associate commissioner of fraud and enforcement who has really again, hit the ground running, evaluating that unit, trying to see what best practices are, and making sure that we can adequately investigate fraudulent schemes in insurance. And so you'll see that we've updated our MFR metrics in our formal response. This is to ensure that we're more focused on investigating those longer-term complex cases. And the request for 6 additional PINs in that fraud area is also to ensure that we are adequately staffed to investigate fraud, because when we solve for fraud and enforce against that, that helps all of us bring insurance rates down, and that's what we need to do, certainly in this environment. And then finally, we're very focused on our personnel and recruitment efforts, as well as retention. We are a challenging, specialized space. We have a lot of competition from the private sector. As you likely saw both in our testimony and in the analysis, as of last week, there were 32 vacancies at the MIA. That's a vacancy rate of about 12.4%. The good news is we have 10 folks scheduled to start this month by March 5th, which will significantly bring down that rate. We have 5 offers out to candidates, and the remaining positions are in active recruitment. So I'm confident that we'll be addressing our current vacancy rate, and we'll also be looking at overall recruitment and retention efforts going forward. So with that, I'll pause. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And Ms. Hatchett, did you want to, are you just here for the question part? Okay.
Exactly.
Members, who would like to go first? Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. Congratulations on the new role. Just quickly, so you kind of covered it. So just to confirm, because obviously we are looking closely at everything, and I know you all had a number of new positions added to the budget last year, another 13 requested this year. So other than the contractual conversion, which you sort of talked about, for the most part, these 6 new PINs are specifically in the fraud division?
They're specifically in the fraud division. The contractual conversions reflect actually mostly for our health coverage assistance team.
Okay.
That was a new effort started to help folks navigate insurance questions, no matter whether it's a business regulated by us or someone else. And that team is handling a bunch of different inquiries, doing really well, and we thought it was appropriate to convert those positions to a permanent program.
I would love to talk to you. One of the priorities I know for our chamber writ large is really trying to figure out for our childcare workforce how we can help them navigate the insurance market, whether it's through the exchange or through other means. So maybe we could talk offline about that. And then on the fraud piece, I mean, obviously more fraud investigators, as you said, brings down the cost. Do you have any kind of a metric on? I'm just going to throw this out there. For every 1 additional fraud investigator we hire in cases that are closed, we save the public X amount of money, or we're able to generate X amount of revenue back into something.
I do not have exactly what you're talking about, but I can get that for you. I think, obviously fraud costs Marylanders millions of dollars a year, tens of millions of dollars a year right now. So we can get you some information on that.
And then I would be remiss not to ask you, just because we have you here with this expertise, any thoughts on, I mean, obviously, I think, again, this is an issue that we're seeing with our colleagues across the board here. Anything, recommendations, thoughts on why we're seeing insurance rates increase so much? You talked a little bit about, driving and the change from COVID, the cost of cars. We know, obviously, what happens is not in a vacuum. So as climate events happen that cause huge amounts of costs for homeowners across the nation, obviously that impacts our policies. But anything in particular that we should be thinking about as a legislative body, or things that we could do outside of your agency to maybe make things a little bit easier for some of our constituents?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and all of those questions I'm sort of obsessed with day to day, so I can definitely talk for hours about this. I won't do that now. Just some highlights. So first of all, on auto insurance and personal auto insurance, I think what we're seeing is a national phenomenon. It's not just Maryland. We do have pretty high and rising rates, and that's due to a lot of different things, right? It's due to the costs of cars these days. It's due to inflation. It's due to inflation with repair costs and parts. And there are also some factors unique to Maryland in terms of just like our congestion, our commuting times. All of those things are items that help to contribute to rising costs. That all being said, one of my priorities for this year in 2025 is to take a wholesale look at the market in affordability in the auto insurance market and see if there are recommendations or tools where we can look to further address that. We're not going to solve for it, but I'm not convinced that we've done the look that we need to see if there are things that we can do. On the homeowner side, and we have a relatively healthy and thriving market in homeowners insurance in Maryland, but there are signs that there are some concerns down the line, right? So there's signs of hardening. We just did a report, which I'm happy to share with you all, on things that insurers are taking to sort of tighten their risk or avoid their risk, or maybe they're not covering roofs over a certain age anymore. Or maybe they are taking harder looks at repairs folks have done to their homes and not covering things if they don't see general upkeep. Or maybe they are limiting their exposure in coastal areas where their projections indicate that they may face open exposure. So we're actually expecting to get a lot of data through a survey through the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, probably late March, that'll give us zip code level data on homeowners insurance in particular. So much more to come on that topic. I am glad to say we are not in the situation that a California or a Florida or North Carolina are in for any number of reasons, but it's something that requires vigilance, and we're working on that.
Great. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Mangione.
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Acting Secretary. And good luck with your hearing as well, Secretary Grant. Just two things. Number one, I want to make sure I understand correctly, as the analyst pointed out, that the insurance tracking project, the initial cost, and I know that you're new, so I'm not like blaming you by any means here, but it was supposed to be $2 to $3 million for the implementation of the final project. Is that right? And now it's into the plus 20 some million? So
my understanding, and of course my understanding is as of October 1, right? Mm-hmm. So my understanding is this is about what the agency had forecast. I do think where the discrepancy lies is what was projected for fiscal year 2025. I think when the budget came before you all last year, it did not reflect the full costs of what the agency anticipated. I think our staff there would tell me that they knew it was going to be more, but they just didn't know how much more, and so they were advised to use the budget amendment process, which they did to reflect what the actual cost was. So that's what happened, but I'm here to tell you, I don't find that answer particularly satisfactory. I would understand why you wouldn't, and we'll keep in close touch to the extent that we're seeing any shifts in the costs.
And that definitely helps clarify a little, because that's obviously, you hear lots of criticism, people all the time talking about government and whether there's waste or whether there's fraud, whatever. And that's significantly higher, but that does clarify a little bit. And I guess my next question would be, it seems like the legacy system was way out of date, which is good. We need to upgrade, obviously, especially when it comes to the taxpayers getting the services in a reasonably timely manner. I guess my question would be, once the new tracking system is in play, would that, I guess, streamline things to a point where will you need the same amount of employees, or is there going to be need for further hiring, less hiring? I mean, how would that work in terms of where you see the efficiency come into play?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think the answer is TBD. Just a couple of thoughts for what post-implementation looks like. I think we'll have to make some decisions on sort of what the costs and personnel are needed. First of all, just to make sure that the system keeps updated and functioning day to day, and we'll be sure to include that information in our reports that go to you all. I think the second question is, like many state agencies, we probably never have enough people. But I see the opportunity to allow our jobs to be easier, and also to allow us to be more data-driven overall, and understand more in real time the trends that we are seeing, whether it be home, auto, health, life, complaints, right? Complaint resolution. So more to come on efficiencies in terms of size of the state workforce, but I am really excited about the opportunity to make our jobs easier and to also identify problems that we're seeing in the markets much earlier.
Thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members? Okay, we wish you a lot of luck. I hope you get the job, and I hope you get the job.
I do. I love it.
Yes, great. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much.
Next, we have the Maryland Department of Transportation. We are hearing two reports today. One is on the debt service, and the other is Maryland Department of Transportation overview. And we have with us Secretary Wiedefield, who is coming forward, and our analyst is Scott Benson. And Scott, we'll give you a couple of minutes. Do you two want to handle these together, or would you prefer to handle them separately? Secretary, together or separate?
Together's fine.
All right, then we're going to go over the analysis of both of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is the DLS overview of the Department of Transportation. Beginning on page 2, this chart is showing the total budget, both operating and capital, totals $6.7 billion, which is about a $181.3 million increase. Turning to page 5, this is showing a summary of the fiscal 24 closeout report. The year-end balance was $631 million, which was roughly similar to the estimate. And on the top of page 6, there is a discussion of fiscal year 25 year-to-date revenue attainment. Through November, revenues from motor fuel, titling, and vehicle registration was about $50.3 million lower than projections. If this revenue attainment pattern were to continue through the remainder of the year, collections would be approximately $133.8 million lower than projections. Turning to page 7, this is showing the revenues for the Transportation Trust Fund over the 6-year forecast period for the MDOT financial plan. The largest single source of revenue is motor fuel taxes at about 20%. Followed by federal support to the capital program and titling and registration taxes. These 4 revenue sources total about 2/3 of overall revenue for the TTF. Exhibit 3 on page 8 and 9 is showing the MDOT Transportation Trust Fund forecast, showing the actuals for FY24 as well as the 6-year forecast period. You can see at the top the closing fund balance in FY24 of $631 million, which decreases to about $400 million in FY25 and 26. The forecast also shows details on revenues, expenditures, debt service, and capital summary. On the top of page 9, there's approximately $21.2 billion programmed in the capital program over the 6-year period. In Exhibit 4 on page 10, this is showing the capital funding sources. You can see that there's a roughly equal split between special and federal funds, about $7.8 billion for each. If you add general funds and other state funds to special funds, total state support for the capital program is about 44% of 6-year funding. Additionally, there's about 11% from bond funds for both consolidated transportation bonds and grant anticipation revenue vehicle bonds. Exhibit number 5 on page 11 is showing a year-over-year comparison of the January 24 and 25 capital programs, looking at the 5 years out of the 6-year forecast that overlap between the two. This is showing that there's about a $1.16 billion increase in capital spending in the January 2025 plan, due largely to the assumption of additional special fund revenues through new revenues proposed in the budget. Exhibit 6 on page number 12 is showing the capital budget by category of spending. This is showing that the largest area of capital spending, about 44%, is for system preservation projects. This is also closely analogous to state of good repair, which is another term that's used when we're talking about capital investments. And on page 13, this chart is showing an annual capital spending trend summaries from fiscal 2011 through the 2030 forecast. You can see there's been some fluctuation year over year in recent years. However, since fiscal 23, there's been an increase each year. And in fiscal 2025, capital spending is projected to exceed $3 billion for the first time before continuing to grow to peak in fiscal 28 at just under $3.5 billion. The next section of the analysis transitions from talking about the 6-year forecast period to specifically the current budget year. Exhibit 8 is showing the fiscal 24 spending. About 47% or $3.1 billion is MDOT's operating budget. Transportation capital, which includes both traditional capital and the state aid highway user revenue grants, totals just under $3 billion, or about 45%, with about 7% going towards debt service and a small portion going to deductions to other agencies. Exhibit 9, which begins on page 15 and continues to page 16, shows the summary of the budget, breaking out both operating and capital by mode, debt service and highway user revenue. Operating increases in fiscal 26 by about $202.6 million, and capital decreases by about $69.2 million. There's a note on the chart that the fiscal 25 working appropriation does not include $109.5 million in operating budget amendments that have been processed year to date. So to that extent, the year-over-year change shown on page 15 would be lower than what is stated for operating. We also include discussion on page 16 and 17 about one-time general funds in the fiscal 25 appropriation, just because it is somewhat unusual to see such a large amount of general funds in the MDOT operating budget. Most of these are accounted for through one-time deficiency appropriations, the largest being a deficiency representing a settlement payment that was approved by the Board of Public Works in November to settle litigation related to the State Center redevelopment project. There's also about $4 million in general funds for MPA related to the Howard Street Tunnel project that were inadvertently reverted in fiscal 24 closeout that are reappropriated, as well as some other smaller one-time spending in fiscal 25. Exhibit 10 on page 18 is showing the fiscal 26 operating budget allowance by mode. You can see the largest single areas for MTA, about 43%. And if you look at MTA and the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority together, funding for transit is about 65% of the total operating budget. Page 19, Exhibit 11 is showing a summary of the MDOT personnel. Overall, the fiscal 26 allowance has 209 new positions, the bulk of which are in MTA for supporting delivery and reliability of transit, and MTA police in preparation for the opening of the Purple Line. The other notable change here, there is a conversion of 25 contractual positions in the State Highway Administration to 20 regular positions. On page 21 of the analysis, Exhibit 12 is showing a summary of highway user revenue funding in the budget, breaking out the total allocations to Baltimore City, the counties, and the municipalities. In fiscal 26, this totals $445.8 million, which is an increase of about $52.6 million from FY25. This increase is following percentage allocations in statute, which grow each year, and this change is reflected in that exhibit. Exhibit 13 on page 22 is showing the capital budget by mode. You can see here that the largest area of capital funding, about 30%, is in the State Highway Administration. Then looking at transit, MTA and WMATA together are about 30% of capital spending in FY26. The next exhibit on pages 24 and 25 is showing a summary of first-year construction and design funding. Legislation passed a couple of years ago specifies that the CTP have tables breaking out projects receiving first-year funding for design or construction in either the budget year or the current year. I would note here that when we get into the individual MDOT mode analyses for the individual areas, these analyses will have more detailed breakdown of the individual capital projects. And then the last exhibit in this section under beginning on page 26 and continuing to the top of page 28 is a summary of the other funds included in the capital budget. These are largely non-state fund sources, an example being passenger and customer facility charges within the Maryland Aviation Administration for improvements at BWI Airport. There is GEO bond funding, which is included in the other fund designation. This supports a portion of the Howard Street Tunnel project funding, as well as capital grants to WMATA. The issues section of the analysis begins on page 29. The two exhibits on page 30 and 31 are showing first in Exhibit 16 on page 30. This is showing the new transportation revenues that were enacted last session and the proposed revenues that are proposed this session. Last year's revenues total about $1.8 billion over the 6-year period. The revenues proposed this year total about $2.15 billion over the 6-year period, $470 million in fiscal 26, and then $420 annually each year after that. And on the next page, page 31, Exhibit 17 is showing the breakdown of how these new revenues are projected to be used in the budget. So you can see the first couple charts are showing estimated declines in revenues that these new revenues would make up for. And then the two bars on the right-hand side of the chart are how the revenues are projected to be used for both operating and capital expenses. Then on page, so all of these new proposed revenues are BRFA provisions, which are included in that bill, and there will be additional discussion of these in the fiscal note for the BRFA as well as during the bill hearing for the BRFA. On page 32 of the analysis, there's also discussion of 4 additional transportation-related BRFA provisions. These items, DLS is only making one recommendation on these. The first item, which is proposing to eliminate required operating expense growth assumptions in the TTF forecast due to concerns over the potential understatement of operating costs in future fiscal years, which would impact future budget assumptions. DLS is recommending rejecting this BRFA provision. The other three, we're not making recommendations on this time. These are relating to increasing the debt limit on transportation bonds, expanding the allowable usage of Garvey bonds, and delaying requirements for MTA to purchase zero-emission buses. The final issue that's discussed in the analysis is a discussion of MDOT's proposed new capital expansion prioritization program. There's been departmental legislation introduced this year, which would require MDOT to develop a new project-based scoring system to evaluate certain major transportation projects for inclusion in the CTP based on quantifiable measures, looking at the consideration of project benefits related to its cost. Then this analysis goes on to discuss the model in more detail here, and basically this would be a model that would be done with scoring on a 2-year basis. The CTP would continue to be produced on an annual basis, but every 2 years this ranking and this model would be prepared and released to the public for transparency purposes. To conclude, on pages 37 and 38, DLS is making one operating budget recommendation, recommending adoption of annual budget bill language similar to prior years, which would require notification to the budget bill, the budget committees of proposed changes to the transportation capital program. That concludes the DLS analysis, and I can take any questions at this time. Thank you.
I think we will move on to the debt overview, and then we'll take all questions together.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. Members of the committee, Steve McCulloch with the Department of Legislative Services, here to present the MDOT debt service requirement analysis. For review, MDOT issues 15-year consolidated transportation bonds, or CTBs. These are tax-supported debts of the department and are limited to, as I said, 15 years. They also will be discussing Garvey bonds, which are also a type of debt that they will be issuing or proposing to issue. And then the department has a variety of what's termed non-traditional debt, which is all other debt besides CTBs and Garvey bonds. The chart at the bottom of page 1 shows the debt service on the CTBs for fiscal year 2026. There's a slight decrease, 4.7 million, reflective of the fact that there have been no issuances in the past 2 fiscal years. Turning to page 2, one of the main analysis fact points for the debt service is to look at the coverage, debt service coverage ratios. The state has a limit in statute on how much CTB debt can be outstanding, and then the department has bond resolution requirements that can are related to net income and pledged taxes, and there's also a requirement in statute that within the overall CTB debt limit, which is currently at $4.5 billion, that the General Assembly set an annual limit for the end of the budget fiscal year, and so you'll see that in the recommended actions section. The 2 debt service coverage tests that are in bond resolutions are that net income from the prior year and pledged taxes from the prior year equal at least 2 times maximum future debt service payments in all CTBs outstanding and to be issued. The department has adopted an administrative practice of maintaining at least 2.5 times debt service coverage for both of those metrics. The net income coverage ratio is the more limiting of the 2, so you'll see that mentioned throughout. Pledged taxes is usually several times more than the net income. As I mentioned, there were no CTBs issued in 23 or fiscal 24. Therefore, the amount of debt outstanding declined to $2.9 billion at the end of 2025. There is an estimated issuance in fiscal 2025. However, the amount of principal being retired is about equal, and so that number stays at just under $2.9 billion in the end of fiscal 2026, with the net income to debt service ratios projected at 3.1 times debt service, and it remains above the 2.5 level throughout the forecast. We did look at, as you heard in the previous analysis, there are new revenues that are assumed in the BRFA, and these are included in these debt service coverage calculations. If the roughly $420 million of ongoing revenue were not to be approved, the current level of bond issuances planned would still not breach that 2.5 level. However, if the full new revenues were to come out, that means the capital program would drop by an equivalent $2.1 billion over the 6 years. There is not sufficient capacity in the bond debt service ratios to increase bond issuances sufficiently to cover that amount of capital without breaching the 2.0 level, which is the bond resolution. If that 2.0 level were ever to be breached, the department has, under its bond resolutions, pledged that no more debt would be issued until those debt ratios rose above the 2.0 minimum. Exhibit 1 on page 3 shows the CTP debt issuance, debt service, and debt outstanding history from 2016 through 2024, and then projections through 2030. The green bars are the issuances, the blue bars are the resulting debt service, and the red line is the CTB debt outstanding at the end of every year. You'll see at the beginning of that series, sharp increase in issuances and the resulting debt service and debt outstanding. That was a reflection of the 2013 gas tax increase that occurred. It allowed more capacity to issue debt. There was a lot of pent-up demand for the capital program, and therefore the debt issuances did creep up until they kind of maxed that out, and you've seen the declining issuances and debt service outstanding since that point. The same thing occurs slightly, you can see in the projected 26 through 27. We do see some increased projections of issuances. However, it's not nearly as pronounced as after following 2013. On page 4 is a discussion of the grant anticipation revenue vehicles. Now, a grant anticipation revenue vehicle, or GARVI bond, are bonds that are issued by states or other public authorities, and they are repaid from future federal aid. So the state gets formula funding for both transit and highways. It's fairly predictable, and the federal government a couple decades ago authorized the use of those funds to back debt. However, they made clear in the federal statutes that it was no guarantee that the federal funds would be available in the future, although, as we've seen, it's been very constant over time. That means that if the feds were to cut the federal grants formula funding, the state would still be on the hook to pay off these GARVI bonds. The state has used GARVIs once in the past. Once they became eligible, that was to help construct the Inter-County Connector, or ICC project. There was a total of $750 million issued over 2 years. The last of those bonds, which at the time were limited to 12 years maximum maturities, were paid off in fiscal 2020. At that point, there were no additional authorizations for Maryland to use GARVI bonds. 2 years ago, legislation was passed to give the department the general authority to issue GARVI bonds, with the stipulations that there could be no more than $1 billion of outstanding debt at the end of any fiscal year, and it was also only allowed for specified use of projects. As you heard in the previous analysis, the BRFA of this year has a provision that would add another eligible use related to light rail modernization. And the CTP does include a project that would expect to utilize $248 million of these GARVs through this current forecast through 2030, and $841 total over the life of the $1.4 billion project. Under current assumptions, the first tranche would be issued in 2027 with a level of debt service about $27 million annually. The second tranche would be issued after this forecast period in 2031 with expected debt service for that tranche to equal about $35 million. I would just close on this issue to note that the use of GARVs basically increases the capital program currently at the expense of having those federal funds that will now be dedicated to debt service to be available to pay for capital pay-go, on an annual basis. So it will reduce by those $27 and $35 million per year the amount of federal aid devoted to capital until those bonds would be paid off. On exhibit page 5 and continuing the next couple pages, exhibit 2 shows all of the non-traditional debt issuances outstanding plus 1 pending. All total, there are 9 current direct non-traditional debt issuances that are outstanding at the year, and there's 1 pending issuance. If this pending is issued as planned, there's a projection that there'd be about $820 million in unpaid principal at the end of fiscal 2026. The recommendations begin on page 9. These are annual recommendations. The first recommendation sets debt limits for both CTBs and non-traditional debt. And then the second recommendation on page 9 is requiring non-traditional debt reports twice a year that help support this analysis. That concludes our presentations.
Thank you for that very thorough analysis. Secretary Wiedefeld, would you like to address both of these reports, and then we'll have questions and answers.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Watson and members of the committee. For the record, Paul Wiedefeld, Secretary of Transportation. And I want to thank Sam and Steve, actually, for their hard work preparing the analysis of the department's budget. I'll keep, on the overview, I'll keep my comments around three general areas: the proposed budget, some highlights of the few projects in the CTP, and I would like to talk a little bit about the Francis Scott Key Bridge as well, and then I'll turn to the debt issue after that. In terms of the proposed budget, thanks to Governor Moore and his leadership, MDOT presented a balanced budget that fully funds and revises projects across the state. These projects prioritize safety and reliability while driving economic growth statewide. Our balanced plan proposes an additional $420 million in state transportation revenue annually. This additional funding is critical to fully leverage all available federal funding and financing opportunities. This would turn a $420 million annual state investment into $695 million annually of new resources. I also want to thank the General Assembly for their support last session's passing more than $250 million in additional transportation revenues annually. The additional revenues passed last session allowed MDOT to restore most of the impactful reductions that were proposed at that time. For example, this included increasing funding for MTA's mobility service for the disabled community to meet its rising demand and increase contract costs, funding of the highway user revenue and lots locally operated transit system programs, maintaining funding for the MARC and commuter bus services, meeting our operating and financial commitments for the WMATA system and the Purple Line, and continuing programs like the State Highway Administration's Operation Clean Sweep, initiating targeting roadside litter pickup. While these funds filled some critical needs, they were not sufficient to address growing needs. With additional revenues proposed by Governor Moore in this year's budget, the department is able to address critical safety and maintenance projects, all with an eye to fully leverage our federal funds and support inclusive economic growth. Turn to CTP highlights. NDOT's balanced plan includes maintaining operations across the department and advancing priority projects. This includes constructing critical safety projects, for instance, on I-81 in Washington County and US 15 in Frederick County. We are also advancing design on previously deferred projects throughout the state, such as Maryland 97 in Montgomery Hills, Maryland 90 in Ocean City, Medical Center Drive in Prince George's County, Southern Maryland Rapid Transit Study, and many others. The additional revenue will also fully fund the modernization of the overhaul of the Baltimore light rail system in conjunction with the state's $213 million federal grant awarded to purchase new and accessible light rail vehicles. The program also enhances economic competitiveness of the Port of Baltimore to maintain and expand its ability to drive growth and opportunity throughout the entire state, and we will address system preservation and safety needs at BWI Thurgood Marshall International Airport as well as Martin State Airport. Finally, turning to the Francis Scott Key Bridge, while we're highlighting today MDOT's projects, I want to take a moment to discuss our progress on rebuilding the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Just so that we are clear, the bridge is owned by the Maryland Transportation Authority, which is separate from MDOT's budget and the state's Transportation Trust Fund. And as you know, the MDTA is funded through tolls it collects. Governor Moore and I are grateful to Maryland's federal delegation for getting Congress to pass federal funding to rebuild the bridge. But of course, we'll continue to work very closely with the OAG to recoup full costs and damages that are basically owed by the owners and operators of the Dolly. Our progressive design builder came on board last fall, and pre-construction activities began in January. As for the new bridge, MDTA is working with an accelerated timeline to rebuild the bridge and have it fully open to traffic as quickly as possible. Turning quickly to the debt, the debt presentation, again, I want to thank Steve for his work. We're very proud to have received a credit rating upgrade of AAA from Moody's in September. This is the department's first credit rating upgrade since 2010. And we do obviously accept the recommendations in the annual budget language that was proposed by DLS. In closing, I'm eager to work with this committee and General Assembly to pass our proposed transportation budget. The budget before you is contingent on additional revenues being available to fund many critical operations and projects across the state. Given other changes that have occurred since the draft CTP was released back in September, if the proposed additional revenues do not pass, I expect we would have to make additional cuts beyond those made last September. In contrast, the additional $420 million in annual revenue into the program is vital to Maryland. The dollars will support a variety of crucial investments and advance MDOT's priorities in every jurisdiction in the state, including the construction of long-promised transportation projects that will help Maryland's economy grow. Thank you for that time, and the department concurs with DLS recommendations. Be glad to take any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Who would like to begin? Delegate Mangione.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I guess I have to make this statement before I ask you a question, is that I just my opinion, join what I believe is the opinion of the overwhelming majority of Marylanders that the 75-cent retail fee is something they highly oppose, as I said, as do I. It was in a recent Washington Post poll that just came out, I think, yesterday. In terms, so I won't ask you to speak on the fee. That's the governor's job there. But in terms of the revenue that comes in from that fee, can you pinpoint where that goes in the budget? Is it project specifically? And give me all the detail you can on that. Thank you.
Sure. You know, as a trust fund, in effect, all the dollars come into one pot, and then we try to prioritize with, again, around the cores of the system, safety, system preservation, and then expansion. So those dollars would support that same philosophy. So it may be, in effect, safety projects across the state, in any part of the state. It may be system preservation, whether it's a bridge, repaving a road, what have you, or something at the Port of Baltimore. Those are the dollars that allow us to do that. So it doesn't get pinned specifically to a project, but supports the overall program to deliver the projects.
Again, I'm sure there's a lot more to come with that. My follow-up question, I guess, would be with the vehicle trade-in value. And I talked to some in that industry who said it hits not only the dealers, but also the consumer who's buying the car. I mean, the dealer's saying they're not going to get as many sales, and of course, it's going to lead to a more expensive, transaction for the consumer trying to buy the automobile. So again, I'm not going to ask you to comment on the specific policy, but do you, or your analysts, and maybe this is for the budget analyst, Mr. Romans, but is there an anticipation of how many of the drop of possible auto vehicle purchases because of a policy like that, or have they done any factoring what they anticipate there?
I have not done that, but we will look into that, and we'll work with the analysts as well on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, thank you for the earlier warm welcome to the subcommittee. Looking forward to working with you. A couple of questions. First, wanted to ask about the $50 million shortfall in revenue attainment for the current fiscal year to date, and just ask you in general about forecasting methodologies and how your department tries to avoid significant overprojections or underprojections, particularly with respect to fuel tax revenue. I think, we have an understanding that we don't have a crystal ball, and we have a general sense as to, what the concerns are about the falling revenue in gas tax and all of the different trends that cause that, but want to make sure that as best as possible we can project accurately. And also, in relation to that, how do we ensure accurate projection of future use of electric vehicles, which obviously also impacts fuel tax revenue?
Sure. There's a number of things we do. We look at the finances monthly. Some of this data we get in literally daily, but it's hard to obviously pick a trend off of that. And then quarterly, we do updates of the forecast. We do two major ones during the year where we go detail, where we have outside consultants help us. We work with the controller in the treasurer's office and the overall general fund of how they're looking at revenues. So it's not just the department. It's a much broader statewide perspective of different people that have different pieces of information that are monitoring, and they have different financial advisors that basically monitor this as well, and that's how we do it. So it's really when we develop the draft CT, in July we do one, and then we do one for the final, and those are much more detailed forecasts. So that's what this represents, our best estimate at that time. And as you can imagine, it's multi-billion-dollar revenues that we're monitoring. So fairly close to be within that level, to be frank. But we will continue to do that, work with all of our partners to make sure we do the best we can. In terms of electric vehicles, the marketplace is starting to move a little bit in that direction, meaning maybe not as quickly in pure electric, but moving much closer towards plug-in and hybrid models. At the end of the day, what that means is basically less motor fuel revenue because miles per gallon are going up for those vehicles. So we'll continue to monitor that. It's a national trend in what's playing out there. Clearly, with some of the policy goals of the new administration, we'll have to keep a very close eye on how that plays out in terms of both supporting that network of pure electric vehicles going forward, and also any federal funding opportunities that we have or don't have.
Thank you. If I may ask a follow-up question. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a tough one to articulate, but I think our committee is interested in trying to figure out, when we look at investments in state of good repair, how to do as much of an apples-to-apples comparison of state of good repair investments in roads versus transit, not from the perspective of dollars to dollars invested, but rather to how we achieve a certain quality rating for an asset that is, in the roads category and an asset that is in the transit category, and to be able to say, regardless of what dollars are required to get them sort of at the same letter grade, for example, C+, B-, whatever, how can we best compare those? Is there data that your team might be able to provide us to better understand how we look at the comparison of the sort of the outcomes as opposed to the dollars put in comparing those two different parts of the state of good repair analysis?
I think we can work with you. I mean, we do a lot of work in that area. I mean, just sort of big picture wise, when we think of state of good repair, we think of, we purchase something and we expect it to perform at a certain level. So this microphone we bought, and if it doesn't perform, then it needs a state of good repair adjustment. So that's the way we sort of look at some of these things that we do. And then how do you compare those is a little bit more complicated, but you have to look at the long-term implications of not repairing something over time, both in terms of its impact on customers and also its costs to actually eventually get to it. So a good example of that is the light rail in Baltimore. If you don't maintain that state of good repair, at some point you have to go back and rebuild the whole thing. which is what we're in that case, very similar to what we had to do with WMATA, as you know. So it is a little, a bit of an art, to be frank, to do that, but I think we should be as transparent about, some of those decisions. But at the bottom line, these are large capital investments that we generally cannot walk away from. We have to manage them as best we can to keep performing for the customers.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you. Always appreciate working with so many members of your team throughout the year on a whole variety of things. Had a question for you, and maybe this is something, I don't know that you can answer this right now, but maybe you can get this list to our team. It's always sometimes hard to sort of put all of the charts together over the course of the year. And so obviously we had, the CTP last year, then we had the draft CTP that came out that cut a whole number of things in there. Then we have revenue proposals and a restoration. If your team could get us sort of what was cut, what got fully restored, what got restored but maybe delayed, what got just delayed and maybe not restored or is restored in the out years, so that we can sort of do an apples to apples comparison of where we've been throughout the year. And I don't know, maybe there are a couple of key projects that you could just touch on, but we'd love to see that whole thing just sort of laid out for us to understand.
We will definitely get that for you. I can tell you some of the few larger ones that were not restored. For instance, was the triple bridges on the Beltway, and that's because we're taking a whole look at that project, to be frank. So that was one that was not restored, but we can get you that entire list. And really, it really is the next level down, to be frank, because there were very few at that scale. It's much at a much finer grain. So I will get that for you.
Great. And then just a couple of other sort of quick questions on. One of the areas that's really important to me, and I think the sort of Western Maryland chunk of folks, is the proposed midday expansion on the Brunswick line. And, I think what's really important to many of us is seeing that we're actually potentially expanding service, but really, delivering to our constituents. Do you have any sense, obviously, we don't have the MTA budget in front of us right now, whether that midday service is going to be, the proposal for that is going to be restored, which, again, we were hoping would start this past fall or late 2024, and if not, where we are on it?
Yes, we are. That proposal's back in. We obviously have to work with our contractor, meaning CSX, to reach that deal. But whereas before that was one that, in effect, we were not going to pursue, we couldn't afford it, and now we are pursuing it.
Great, so that's back in. That's fantastic news, at least in the sense of we've got to figure out how to do it now that the timing is different. And then sort of a longer term question, obviously we're not nearly at the funding crisis level that we were last year with the WMATA budget. And I know there's been an ongoing work group with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to sort of bring all the jurisdictions together. Can you give us an update on where things are with that and what, obviously, very well Metro's budget issues from your previous role. Where are we with sort of the long-term solutions so we're not back in another similar situation in a couple of years as we were last year?
Sure. I think on the operating side, we've been a bit of a leader in that region to making sure that some of those levels were met. We were last year, as you recall, and that was one of the uses of the revenues last year. So I think it is, as you know, we have three other players at the table, both in terms of the Commonwealth and the district, and the federal government. They're also board members, and I would anticipate that may change. Those members may change. So I think we'll have to wrestle with some of those issues with that board together going forward. Out in the distance, obviously, there's capital needs there as well that will need to be addressed. And so I think that is an issue that the region's trying to wrestle with. How do we do that together? And it doesn't fall to one jurisdiction.
Great. And then one last question, if I may. Just would love to get from you an update on where we are on the 495 potential widening. I know in a year where we're going to make tough choices writ large, I think there are a lot of us in the region that think figuring that out is paramount, and maybe not spending money on it right now is important until we've sort of reassessed what the actual future of that looks like. And obviously with the future of federal revenue up in the air as well, footing the bill for that completely on our end would be pretty difficult. So can you give us an update on where things stand on that?
Yeah, so to your point, there are a lot of things up in the air in terms of what does the long-term future of that look like, but there's the short-term future, which is the condition of the bridge. So we have to focus on that And, you know, as you may know, we've gone after some federal dollars for just that part of it. So I think that's where we want to focus in the immediate future, is how do we make sure that we meet the basic needs of the physical structure. And then the longer term issue, I think, is a much broader discussion with the communities and obviously where the federal government starts to land on some of these projects like that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate, and we will move to Delegate Mangione.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And one last question for you. Thanks again, Mr. Secretary. I was looking at Exhibit 5 of the Capital Transportation Program and the comparison in numbers. And I just, under State Highway Administration, it looks like the only category here that's actually being cut. And it says here it's at 576 million. My question, I guess, would be, number one, can you go into detail as to why? And number two, I mean, are we investing in an equitable way, I guess you could say, across the board between transit, highways, all other forms of our transportation, where it's something along the lines of, I mean, are we making sure the quality of work, we talked a little bit earlier about, you know, if we have the investment in highway, you know, we're looking for A+ quality work, right? Mass transit, A+ quality work. Where are we here? Because when I see cuts in one but increases in the other, it makes me wonder if, in fact, that's I know we're seeing a gas revenue or gas tax revenue decrease, but I want to make sure we're not, you know, sidestepping what we're doing with our highways here.
Yeah, I think when you look at the total program period, it doesn't reflect these types of numbers. So this is a year-to-year, over-year comparison. So I think when you look at the entire program, we're continue to commit to investment on the highway system. Transit, obviously, we pay for the operations of transit, unlike under Lake State Highway. Obviously, we pay operations, but not drivers and the mechanics. So that delta will always be there, you know, between operating on the operating side. On the capital side, it's much more sort of even between the two.
And I do see that it's a higher cost for under the State Highway Administration, but when I see a big cut and that's the only one, but I understand, so you're saying that's kind of the year, going by the year, not the 5-year process, but it just caused a little concern for me, but I appreciate your answers there. Thank you.
And perhaps the legislative analyst could get us the total comparison that looks similar to that. I'm sure you have that in your data somewhere.
This is a 6-year comparison.
Exhibit 5 on page 11.
Yeah, that's the 5-year overlap between last year's forecast and this year's
I'm sorry, I do see that.
So the $576 million change is over 5 years.
Over 5 years.
Okay, and then the, let's just take the MTA, 984 million is an increase over 5 years, total.
But I still would want to dig in a little bit deeper because the total program is at 21 billion. So I want to make sure we're comparing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's.
This is just comparing apples to apples in terms of the 5 years that were in last year's forecast or also in this year's forecast. So what this comparison does not include is 2030, because that wasn't in last year's. It doesn't include 2024, because that wasn't in this year's forecast. There's a year on each end that drop out.
If we could get back to you with the specific question you asked of the current program, where it compares on highway, all modes. I'll do the same thing, but add in another year, because our proposed budget is at 21 billion.
Thank you.
Okay.
And as part of that, I think one of the things we also want to look at is we do provide funding for the counties, the highway user revenue, and that's not in that number, right? Or it is?
I will make sure we have the right
So we
numbers.
sort of want to look at all sources of funding being applied to our roads versus our transit, just so we have an idea. In follow-up to that, on page 19, same type of thing. I just see that we have, I'm just wondering, what are the contractual positions that we are decreasing by 25 on page 19 under SHA?
I don't have the specifics. I'll get to the specifics, but the general philosophy is where we can, if you can move contractuals to permanent, you actually can save dollars.
Yes.
So that's what we're trying to do with that. And it is allowed I'm not sure under what, but I'll get you the information.
So do you think that those 25 contractuals is the 28 in the upper chart?
I'm not certain.
20 of the 28.
Okay.
So when there's a contractual conversion, it's 1.5 contractuals become one permanent.
One pin, right.
They did that this past summer through DPW.
So you haven't, so what it looks like, could look like to some people is that you've cut 25 positions. That's not the case. You've actually made 20 permanent positions. Okay. That's good. I have one last question, and then everyone else, please think if you have anything else, because we're going to get to the people who want to testify. Mr. Secretary, late last week, we received a memo from the Department of Transportation that detailed some requirements of states from under the new administration. Have you had the ability to take a look at that? Do we, as a state, have to respond to that within 10 days? And what are your initial thoughts on that?
As we've all seen, this is a moving target for all of us. We do know some of the things, like, for instance, our formula dollars are still coming in. There are still questions on some of the discretionary projects. So we're working, in fact, right now in Washington, my peers are meeting on that very subject, and we're working very closely with federal US DOT to get a better understanding of the implications of this by mode, whether it's transit, port, airport, across the board. So it is still a moving target for us right now, and we will continue to monitor it. And again, this is not just Maryland, this is, the entire country is working through this right now.
Do we have a 10-day deadline to respond to it?
No, I didn't think so. Yeah.
Okay. Is it possible that this will impact our current budget?
It's possible.
Okay. I assume you will keep us updated.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions from our members? Okay, we will move to the people who have signed up to testify. First, we have John Laria from the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission, followed by Robin Budish of Transit Choices, Brian O'Malley of Central Maryland Transportation Alliance. You may all come forward if you're here. And Mr. Laria, you may begin.
Chair Watson, members of the subcommittee, John Laria, as Chair said, here on behalf of the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission. I think you know that the BRTC was created by the General Assembly to provide advocacy and oversight for the regional transit system operated by MTA and to ensure that diverse stakeholders are represented and we have diverse representation. You have my written testimony, and I probably have about 2 minutes, so I'm going to make 4 key points. One, I've been in this role for about a year. And I am deeply, deeply worried about the system's current condition, especially light rail. To be clear, it's not dangerous, people have asked. It's just fragile. And for example, as noted in our December annual report to you, Commission members toured the light rail system. Delegate Solomon also came with the Transit Caucus, and it was a bit shocking. The light rail system is, in short, at risk of total failure without funding for traction power substations, especially at the BWI Spur, which would terminate service to the BWI Airport, and also at the North Avenue main yard, where loss of a substation could cripple the entire light rail line. You also know, perhaps, that we're running cars from when the system was launched over 3 decades ago, and maybe half are actually in shape to run. Even Delegate Corman, your colleague, was quoted in the news as saying that the light rail system, quote, is being held together by MacGyver with duct tape and chewing gum. And I would add, and I'm sure everybody would add, held together by exceptional employees at MTA who are doing an extraordinary job with the resources that they have. Second point, the draft CTP would certainly have been regrettable, at least. $670 million in project deferrals would have failed to meet legislatively mandated standards, TSIA, state of good repair funding. Third, thanks to concerted advocacy and the governor's leadership and commitment, the final CTP is a dramatic improvement, as you've heard from the Secretary. And while it is not enough to address what the system needs, it's really a minimum, not a maximum. It is, in fact, a tremendous down payment on those long-term needs by addressing the most acute issues, especially achieving an acceptable level of state of good repair as a foundation for future enhancements and expansion. Secretary has described this as CTP getting us back on track, and I agree. Fourth and final point, I implore you to support and protect this budget proposal. First of all, it's a genuine economic development issue. Again, Delegate Corman was quoted as saying, employers want to be near transportation that works. And perhaps more poignantly, I'll quote Governor Moore, who said, you can't have economic mobility without physical mobility. Many Marylanders rely on our system to get to work, to get to school, to get to the grocery store, to get to medical appointments. They badly, badly need this system to be stable and reliable and certainly not fragile. I don't want to let our fellow Marylanders down. I'm sure you don't. We truly, truly need your budget support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laria. Any questions for him? I will say that we love having the ghost of Delegate Corman here with us. He haunts us daily. Go ahead, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Metro, 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 and maybe he'll appear. It's a little bit of an inside joke if anybody saw the videos last year. Mr. Laria, thank you for being here, and thank you for helping us organize the trip. And I'll say thank you to I know Secretary Wiedefeld's not up here anymore, but the folks from MTA and MDOT who also made that happen. I think for those of us that don't ride the light rail on a regular basis, we sort of understand it, but to see it in literally real time, including some of the transforming stations that have had problems, was just incredibly eye-opening. And I don't think we can shout it enough from the rooftops that for the grace of God and incredible employees and the duct tape, that system is still functioning. But if we lose it, it would be terrible to the region. And while that doesn't run through my constituency, obviously it's a huge impact to the state. So really appreciate you bringing that up and your advocacy on that. The question I have for you, I think, is one that you've touched on already, that this gets us back to sort of hold harmless, but it doesn't get us to what we proactively need to do in some respects. And so I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, exactly as you said it and you used Delegate Corman's quotes, but I think to me, what I don't want us to be in a situation, and us as a General Assembly, that every other year we have to keep sort of coming back and making changes to the revenue to boost the CTP, because the headline, if I'm a CEO and interested in moving to Baltimore, that we would see every single year, or to Maryland. Once again, Maryland still hasn't solved the transportation problems. Like that's a sustained drumbeat that I don't want every other year, every year. I'd rather just rip the Band-Aid off. This is me speaking, and let's fix this once and for all. What do you see as what we're not able to get to in this budget, and what could we be doing if we were able to find more revenue dedicated into the CTP and the trust fund?
Yeah. Well, if you gave me a blank check and let me fill it in, that would be terrific. But I know we're all struggling under the same burdens here, and to some extent, I'm grading on the 2025 budget curve, which I think is a practical matter we have to do. That's why this is actually a very, very good outcome, in that it is a system stabilizing foundational sort of investment, which I think is what we need. And I think you'll hear from me and from others that we obviously need much more than that. We also could use it more quickly, of course, because that's the other thing. It's not just it's the how soon, because you have the risk of things failing or having issues with ridership. Certainly, the big question, of course, about the red line, which many people, including me, support. We need these foundational elements. We have to sort out and we've heard it several times today, what the new federal administration might mean for transit and transportation investment. But there are a myriad things, including additional light rail expansion, certainly including other supportive facilities at the metro and the buses, and ultimately the real expansion that we need. The idea here, it's also a question of frequency of service, as you know, Delegate. I know you spent a lot of time on this. The system, the Baltimore system, is regrettably a system largely of necessity, not a system of choice. I would submit to you that in your jurisdiction, Metro, which has had its own struggles, is a system of choice. My ambition, and I hope other people's ambition, is for the system in Baltimore to be a system of choice, so that more people take it, more people are comfortable taking it, and there are lots of reasons for that. But one is frequency of service, quality of the equipment, et cetera. Once again, it has nothing to do with the people. It's about the equipment that we have and our ability to deliver quality, timely service that people of all types can avail themselves of.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Larry.
you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Laria. Robin Budish.
Actually, James Rouse is going to speak.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Rouse. I'm here instead of Robin's here, but I wasn't sure I could make this for medical reasons, but I can. I'm here representing Transit Choices, which I was a co-founder of and am president of the board. It has been our mission over the past 12 years to advocate for a great transit system for the region of Baltimore. We are here in support of the governor's transportation budget. It will allow the MTA to maintain what we have in a state of good repair. This must be done just to be eligible for future federal funds. Transit Choices believes that we need to go further and build a first-rate regional transit system in the Baltimore region. Please read the brochure, which we hand-delivered to each one of your offices at the beginning of this session. The crux of our argument is that it is less expensive to build a great transit system for the region than it is to maintain the status quo. Baltimore should be an economic engine for the state, creating jobs, drawing investment, and increasing our tax base. It is being held back by its high rate of poverty and crime. Studies have shown that the biggest obstacle for people trying to escape cycles of poverty is lack of access to good jobs and educational opportunities due to poor public transit. Read our brochure and see our argument about why creating great public transit system would reduce the tax burden for all Marylanders. Let's start by approving the governor's addition of funds for the transit in this budget. We are asking each of you to support the governor's transportation budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Rouse? Moving on to Brian O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair and subcommittee members. I'm Brian O'Malley, president with the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance. I'm also here, like the two with me, to talk about highlighting the capital needs of the Greater Baltimore public transportation system. I'm not going to quote Delegate Corman, but I want to quote Secretary Wiedefeld's predecessor, then Secretary Greg Slater, who in a hearing like this said that state of good repair and system preservation means two choices: pay now or pay more later. There's no other option. If you don't pay now, the costs snowball and you end up paying more later. And unfortunately, that's what we've done with the public transportation system in the Greater Baltimore region, is we've chosen not to pay now too many times, and we're now seeing that accumulated effect. And I'm so glad that the members of the Transit Caucus toured the light rail and saw it. I heard when members of the BRTC toured it, some of whom serve on my board of directors, and they were really moved and really struck by what they saw, and it sounds like you all were too. I want to highlight that in 2016, 17, and 18, we were hearing a lot about the capital needs of the WMATA system, and for good reason. And you acted, the General Assembly acted in 2018, passing the Maryland Metro Transit Funding Act, and it made a difference in two ways. One, it gave the funding that WMATA needed to invest in badly needed capital needs, but two, it gave them assurance in perpetuity, guaranteed that they would have funding, which allows them to do capital programming. There's a reason we do capital programming 6 years at a time. And what we've done for the Baltimore area system is not that. We've given them sort of a yo-yo of, you're getting cut, oh no, we've come through with the funding, and that's no way to do capital planning. And so it hurts them on the funding side, but it also hurts them on the predictability and the ability to program funds. According to the National Transit Database, which is under the Federal Transit Administration, the breakdown rate of breakdowns per 100,000 service miles in the WMATA metro system has gotten much better since you took that action in 2018. It's about 1/4 in 2023 of what it was in 2016, fewer breakdowns. the MTA's breakdown rate in 2023 was more than 35 times as high as the WMATA breakdown rate, the MTA Metro Subway. And in 2024, I'm afraid it got even worse. We haven't seen the 2024 numbers posted, but we do see on the transit app and from riders talking to us, about a third of all runs are being canceled now. And that creates longer waits and more unpredictability when you go to ride the subway. And people who need to be somewhere can't continue to use a system that's that unreliable. So the solution, we're part of the MOVE coalition that's supporting the governor's transit budget. That's a very important step in the right direction, and we ask for your support. And continue to look for more ways to invest and keep asking about state of good repair needs and making sure that we're paying now, not putting it off and paying more later. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will hear from Michael Sakata and Josh Tolkien. And you each have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Josh Tolkien, speaking on behalf of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. What does the Sierra Club care about the transportation budget? We support long-term sustainability of our transportation system to ensure it connects Marylanders to jobs, food, family, and fun, to protect our climate, clean our air, and grow our economy. That's our frame of reference. Vehicles on our road are responsible for 40% of nitrogen oxide pollutions that contribute to unhealthy ozone pollution. 80% of Marylanders live in a county with a non-attainment designation on the Clean Air Act, which is EPA speak for unhealthy. Lots of technical terms. We've been in non-attainment for so long, people have begun to sort of like the frog in the pot. We're not really realizing that this is impacting our health every single day. The Baltimore and Anne Arundel region recently were put in serious non-attainment. Not only is that a red flag on air quality, but it means that there's actually more restrictions and regulations on industry. These are and have been serious air pollution issues. That is why we were pleased to see that the budget funded the minimum level of the state of good repair as required by the Transit Safety and Investment Act, though I will note that it is a minimum, and we are concerned about the long-term sustainability of funding for the Red Line, WMATA, MARC expansion, growth of our LOTS program, and other local transportation strategies, as well as electrification of our bus fleet. We have big, ambitious goals. They are good for our economy. They are good for public health, and we need to be looking far off at the financial strategies to be growing them. So Sierra Club does support the proposed $420 million revenue strategy, though it's contingent on support for the Transportation Climate Alignment Act and the new MDOT prioritization program. As we have learned the hard way, the challenge is with raising revenue and not connecting it to long-term spending. We are here to be a partner in other long-term revenue strategies. We would like to be part of that conversation with you all, to be looking at not just hitting the bare minimum, but the long-term needs of our transportation system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tonkin. Mr. Sakata?
Chair, members of the committee, my name is Michael Sakata. I have the privilege of leading the Maryland Transportation Builders and Materials Association, for the record, MTBMA. But it isn't about me, it's about the men and women who build and maintain and power Maryland's transportation network. They're the backbone of our state, working tirelessly on our roads, our bridges, constructing the transit lines, that connect our communities, expand our airports, strengthen our ports, and keep our commerce flowing. These workers don't just punch a clock. They show up in the heat of night, the cold, the dark of night, to ensure Maryland moves forward. They're the skilled crews in the field, engineers solving complex challenges, the suppliers keeping projects on track, and the industry experts shaping the future. The work isn't about just infrastructure, it's about connecting people, families, and businesses and communities. MTBMA proudly stands with them and the businesses, large and small, that employ them. We fight to make sure they have the resources, policies, and support they need to do their job safely and effectively. Because when we succeed, when they succeed, Maryland thrives. Our work in close collaboration with MDOT focuses on making Maryland's transportation system safer, building a strong workforce, and ensuring we grow sustainably to meet the needs of all Marylanders. M2MA, along with a broad coalition of partners, has advocated for increased transportation funding through the Move Maryland Coalition. For far too long, our roads, bridges, transit systems, airports, and ports have suffered from budget cuts, delaying essential projects, putting our economy at risk. We greatly appreciate the General Assembly's support and Governor Moore's leadership in making strategic investments that put Maryland on a path for growth. With the final $21.2 billion transportation budget, making Maryland, this is a major step forward. Thanks to the governor's commitment with the $420 million and nearly $700 million in federal dollars, making that a large investment every year. You know, this means safer roads, more reliable transit, and an economy that continues to thrive. From funding key projects like I-81, US 15, to modernizing our light rail and improving our ports and airports. This keeps Maryland moving. The numbers speak for themselves. For every $1 billion in roadway investment, creates 13,000 jobs. For every dollar in transit, generates $5 in economic impact. The Port of Baltimore alone contributes to nearly $200 million to our economy every day. Investing in transportation isn't just about our infrastructure, it's about the jobs, businesses, and a better quality of life for all Marylanders. And we know this is just a start, right? I mean, this is state of good repair. That's kind of just keeping the lights on, right, guys? But M2MA fully supports Governor Moore's investment in transportation and infrastructure. These investments empower the hardworking men and women of our industry, ensure they have the tools and support they need to keep Maryland moving forward. So we look forward to your support in making this happen. So thank you.
Thank you. And do we have any questions, remaining questions? All right, that concludes this hearing, and we appreciate all of you and your time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And members, if you could approach the